Good evening, everyone, and welcome. This is a concurrent meeting between the City Council and the Bloomington HRA, and I'd like to call the Bloomington City Council portion of this meeting to order. Chair Thorson.
And I will now call the HRA, Bloomington HRA portion of the meeting to order.
Very good. First order of business, we have to call roll for each of the organizations, so we'll start with the Bloomington City Council. Ms. Christensen, if you could please call the roll.
Thank you. Councilmember Beloga.
Aye.
Councilmember Carter.
Here.
Councilmember Coulter.
Present.
Councilmember Lohman.
Here.
Councilmember Martin.
Here.
Councilmember Nelson.
Here.
And Mayor Bussey.
Here. Chair Thorson.
Yes, could we do the roll call for the HRA Commission?
Councilmember Hukim.
Here.
Councilmember Lewis. Councilmember Lewis. Councilmember Olson. Councilmember Olson. Councilmember Thorson.
Here.
If we include Jack Beloga as ours, we have a quorum.
And we certainly would include Councilmember Beloga as a commissioner member in this case as well. So let the record show we've got 7 members of the City Council present and the members of the HRA as recorded. We have one item on our agenda this evening, and it's a continuation of a discussion we began, I don't know, a month or so ago or 6 weeks. Just a general discussion on a variety of organizational information and an explanation of exactly where we are. And so we're going to be hearing tonight about our COVID-19 emergency rental assistance, our NOAA reporting and preservation strategies, funding priorities, and affordable housing trust fund policy and financing tools. And with that, I will turn it over to staff. Ms. Worthington, our Community Development Director, are you going to kick us off on this?
Mr. Mayor, I think we may have temporarily lost Ms. Worthington due to technical difficulties.
We are fighting just a few technical bugs this evening. So let's go to Sherry Showquist. Ms. Showquist is our Opportunity Housing Advisor. Ms. Showquist, are you available?
Good evening, Mayor Bussey, Chair Thorson. This is Sherry Showquist, and unfortunately, I'm not able to share my screen to bring up the presentation. I am wondering if perhaps Myra Wickless could instruct me, or either that or pull it up. Now I've got it. Thank you.
And I am back, Sherry, so if you do want me to introduce, I can do that.
That would be wonderful.
Ms. Worthington, welcome. Good evening.
I apologize. I was having technical issues.
Seems we all are this evening.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Council and HRA. I did want to just give a brief overview of what we're going to try to accomplish in the next hour. And I wanted to also just say that for tonight, what we're trying to do is kind of close out what we began in August with our All Things Housing workshop. And tonight we're going to talk about COVID-19 emergency rental assistance, which is something I know you're all wondering about. And then we're going to move into a discussion around NOAA reporting and preservation strategies, funding priorities, and the Affordable Housing Trust Fund policy itself and financing tools. So tonight is part 2, and we would like to do a third session with you to really dig into the policy recommendations. So you will see some of that tonight, but then we will come back to you probably in October and have the wrap-up conversation with you prior to bringing items back to the council for action. And so I'll hand it over to Sherry. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Ms. Showquist.
Thank you. So the VEEP rental assistance portion will provide you with an update on what what Veep has provided to Bloomington residents to date, and then touch a little bit on our plans to stabilize Bloomington tenants and rental properties before the eviction moratorium ends at the end of this year. So to date, and I would mention as well that Joe McDonald, the executive director of Veep, is participating tonight for this portion of the presentation. From January to August 31st, Veep has dispersed $645,000, serving 453 Bloomington households for an average of $1,424 per household. Nearly 27%, nearly 1/3 of the households served spoke Spanish as a primary language, requiring a bilingual housing specialist. 79% of the rental assistance went to households that are Black, Indigenous, or people of color, 10% to white households, and 11 other, or not reporting. The average household size was 3.33 individuals. 100% of the households reported an income eligibility of 30 to 50% of area median income. The breakdown is below. The majority of the funds that Veep has distributed are their general funds, which includes foundation, corporate donors, their emergency food and shelter program, Veep donors, and funds from the city of Bloomington and the HRA. There are also CDBG funds that are available. However, the CDBG funds do not have the requirement to be utilized by the end of this year. $527,000 has been awarded for rental assistance to date. There are other sources of funding that we are prioritizing, or that Veep is prioritizing to use first. The state COVID-19 Housing Assistance Program, the CARES Act funds through Hennepin County, and then CDBG funds both from Hennepin County and the city. We recently conducted an eviction moratorium impact survey for property managers. COED distributed the online survey to 80 contacts representing, typo, over 120 properties in Bloomington. As of to date, 33 property owners have completed the survey. And as a reference, there are 13,262 licensed rental units in Bloomington. The preliminary results will be shared with a property owner manager forum on September 23rd. COED will host that focus conversation, and the survey continues to be available online through September 30th. Pardon my slide presentation. Okay. The survey response includes both large and small sized property owners, the 1 to 4 region being less represented than the 4, 15 and above, 50 and above, and 100 and above. At least 75% of those surveyed rely on tenants' rents to make a mortgage payment. 49% 100 do for 100%, and 24 partially do so. We asked questions about how many residents have requested a payment plan from March through September. That number was 375. We asked if they had a sense of whether or not tenants lost their jobs and had a reduction in income. 55% said yes. And that number provided was 353. We asked whether or not property owners anticipate a decline in rent payments in October through December, and 52% said yes. Currently, of those surveyed, 82 reported that there are 82 tenants that are at risk of eviction when the moratorium lifts. Logically, the unpaid rents increased substantially from Q1 to Q3. And the organizations that are serving tenants with rental assistance in Bloomington is primarily VEEP. We also asked for reports on unpaid rent, Hennepin County rental assistance, increased subsidy through Section 8, CLUES, and other social service agencies. The themes are that education on specific resources are needed. Some items are out of control of the city's jurisdiction, like the lift of the national or state moratorium. And areas where the city might be able to assist would be to work with social service agencies to allow landlords more direct access to rent support for tenants. So to sum up this section, we are looking to connect renters and property owners with rental assistance resources and strategies to stabilize those tenants and property owners are needed around naturally occurring affordable housing units, affordable housing developments, and market rate housing developments. And with that, I turn it over to Mike Palermo to present on our NOAA reporting and preservation strategies.
Would it be helpful to go section by section and ask questions as we go, or do you want to wait until the end?
Thank you, Mayor Bussi. I think I would defer to you and to Heather Worthington on that question. We have set aside about 10 minutes for each of these sections, and then 30 for the last discussion on funding.
All right. Why don't we power through? We'll if we could save questions till the end, unless there's a clarifying question or something that needs to be asked at that moment, we'll save those to the end, if that's all right, Council. All right, onward.
Hey, thank you. So I'll be talking about our NOAA reporting. So for the last couple of years, we've kind of been monitoring NOAA properties. We use CoStar database. This gives us average rents for most of the units in Bloomington. It's not 100% of the units, but we kind of checked it against our licensing. About 90 or 95% of the units are in this CoStar database. You can see here that total units number, that's a little bit lower than our total rental units, but that is a large majority of our units. There are units in there that we don't have average rents for, so we aren't including that in kind of what we consider NOAA or not NOAA. A lot of smaller properties get missed in this database. Those kind of 4-unit buildings kind of get lost. They're more owned by mom and pop. But CoStar owns apartments.com, and so they're pretty comprehensive. If you're listing on apartments.com, you're getting captured in the CoStar database. So we have this average rent. If you go back one slide, we have it by bedroom size, so we can calculate using our rent requirements for 60% area median income to really figure out, are you above that average or below that average rent for that median? And if you are below that, we count that as a NOAA unit. What we found out moving from November to June, when I did a second pull of the data, is there's going to be a wide fluctuation. We have a large amount of our properties are kind of right at the edge of NOAA. So it'll be really interesting to track over time what that trend line is, but it's really too soon for us because we've only had 2 data pulls to really see a trend. But we can see about half of our units are NOAA units, or 4,600 units are NOAA units. But what's real nice, on the next slide, we can then map this data. We have location data for each of the apartments. So we can really come up with a percentage. And this is by census tract, which is useful because we have other data which we can compare to to give us a sense of where those NOAA units are concentrated. And then we can go into how many units total, or the next slide shows average rents. you get a sense of where the higher rents are. South Loop average rent is $1,319. You know, we've got some new properties that are coming online. Those newer properties are more luxury. As you'd expect, average rent is higher. Where there's a higher concentration of NOAA, that average rent tends to be lower. But the biggest driver of whether you're going to be a NOAA property or not is really age. And so you can see here the average age of the year built of buildings. And as you would expect, we kind of grew from the east to west. So our newer properties are in the west, tend to have a little bit higher rents. So you have a little bit more NOAA there. And we are tracking this data for 3 reasons. One, we just want to know where these buildings are, where these properties are. 2, we want to be able to, if the opportunity presents itself to preserve a NOAA property that might be flipped and converted, it's much more cost effective to save a NOAA unit rather than create a new affordable unit. And then 3rd, we have our tenant protection ordinance, in which we require that upon a sale, the property owner is supposed to notify tenants that a sale has occurred, and then notify tenants if they plan to raise rents, rescreen tenants, or evict with a 3-month notice to give us the opportunity to help those tenants if they need to or potentially be displaced. So we're tracking this biannually. Over the next couple of years, we'll have a nice data set, hopefully get a trend. We're working with Minnesota Housing to, refine this methodology a little bit. We're really leading edge on this, and Minnesota Housing is really kind of following our lead on how to track this, not just in Bloomington, but metro and statewide. So we're part of the statewide kind of group to kind of really hone in on a methodology and understand where NOAA properties are throughout the state. But we use this to track our top 25 potential sales. These properties tend to be larger. They tend to be in those areas where we have the most impact. But we would need to work with our partners. We have developed an internal work group with HRA, planning, environmental health, and assessing, in which we're tracking potential sales. We all kind of work with different rental property owners in different ways, and we hear things at different times. So we really are sharing that information between and work as a team to really identify where the potential sales are occurring and if it's a NOAA property or not. And we meet every 2 months, and we kind of have an email chain too of leads that we hear. And that really leads into our community engagement. We saw our rental survey before with the COVID assistance or the rental assistance. So there really is this effort to really work with property owners. And then having this information is useful for pursuing future funding for preservation efforts or rehab and funding strategies later that we'll talk about. So with that, I'll kind of change gears a little bit and talk about our funding priorities. And so as we know, more and more projects that are coming in are asking for money. And as staff, we wanted to figure out a way on how to really prioritize our time and our money. And really, how do we communicate what we want to see as a city? So we created this communication tool that really kind of lays out our priorities. And it's really helpful, 1, to talk to developers on this is what they should be striving for when they're presenting projects. And 2, it helps us communicate to you and the public why one project is a higher priority than another. Because there's a lot of different factors that go into a development, and from the outside with just a couple of points, people don't get the full picture of what a development is. So I'll kind of walk through what these priorities are and where staff has kind of come. This has really been a joint effort, again, interdepartmental, honing and working on these different criteria. And as we get developments, we've kind of gone a high, medium, or low ranking for each criteria. It's not meant to be a scoring rubric that you meet a certain threshold, you get funding. It's really meant just to kind of, like I said, communicate what our goals are and what we'd like to see from development, and kind of really explain, well, why is one project a high priority versus another project being a low priority? So it really starts of course, with affordable housing. And what that means when we're talking affordability, it can mean a couple of different things. One, it's the number of affordable units. Two, it could be the level of affordability. So are you getting a lot of 60% area median incomes, or are you getting some units that are affordable to 30% area median incomes with a different impact there? And we also look at economic integration. Where are those units within the development? Are they all siloed off on one side of the building or one separate building, or are they integrated within the building? And then dispersion throughout the community. Are we concentrating into a certain part of the community, or are we throughout the city? And then other factors such as, is it near jobs or tourism? And then that really relates to a high impact area. Is the development in a high impact area? Obviously, our development districts are kind of a key focus where we focus development. We also have the Gateway District and Lindale Avenue where we're focusing a lot on creating more density, or is it an opportunity zone or near a priority commercial node? Is it near a transit station? Is it creating that transit-oriented development that we kind of targeted? And then is it meeting the district plan goals? You know, if you are in a development district, are you kind of furthering those efforts? And then other things like walkable, is it dense, proximity to amenity? And then we obviously want community support for the project. And that really is looking at where it is in the community, and then we look at site-specific. Does it have a high-quality design? Is the development being proposed have some sort of sustainability element? Is it utilizing universal design? Universal design is similar to Americans with Disabilities Act. You know, there's certain elements that you can put into a building that make it more livable for people. And a great example is doorknobs versus door handles. As you get older, or if you have difficulty turning a knob, it's easier to use a handle. So that's an example of universal design elements. Is it a building in the middle of a parking lot, or is it a building that's up against the street that's activating the street, creating a vibrant community? Does it provide public amenities or art or a tot lot? You know, it's really focusing on that design of the site itself. And again, similarly, we want to have good community input support for that project. And then will that project end up being a catalyst for future investment? Will it spur other development in the area? We obviously, if we're putting money into a project, we'd like to see other investment around the area. So part of that might be visibility, is in a visible spot where will spur other property owners to want to invest. What is the magnitude of the impact? Is it a big impact for, you know, how much money we're putting in? What's the consequence of no action? Is it a site that's derelict, that's draining on the community, and no action is going to have more harm than if we do something? Or maybe it's a demonstration project that we can replicate elsewhere or show elsewhere to do. And then taking advantage of other city investment in the area. Maybe we're investing near the site, that makes sense to build upon that. And then lastly, what is the return on investment? If we're putting money in, we want to make sure we're getting a good value for that money. What's the developer capacity? Do they have a good history of doing projects like this? Is there a verifiable development gap? We want to make sure that we're filling gaps and doing projects that otherwise wouldn't be happening. So there's the cost benefit and tax generation. And then shovel ready. Is this something that will be able to be done in a reasonable time frame? That these are all things that really play into what is that priority. So if you're hitting most of these in a high priority, we're going to get more staff time and hopefully at some point funding. And so this is really just a tool for us to really kind of prioritize. And with that, I think I turn it over back to Sherry.
Thank you. I will review our Affordable Housing Trust Fund policy and financing tools. So the Affordable Housing Trust Fund priorities encourage development that produces new affordable housing or preserves existing naturally occurring affordable housing, is located in the Opportunity Zone, Gateway District, and or on aging commercial and transportation corridors, incorporates design standards of human-scaled urban design, serves as a catalyst for future investment in the area, and shows a demonstrated need for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund resources. So obviously there is a lot of overlap here. All of the priorities that Mike reviewed before would also be incorporated. These are the main 5 that the HRA, the port, and planning worked together and shared with the community development as a whole. What we have accomplished so far is we have launched our 15.2 million Affordable Housing Trust Fund. We have created an Affordable Housing Trust Fund policy that has been approved by the HRA and will be brought to the City Council in the coming sessions. We also include the application that requires the developer to pay for upfront professional costs. We have identified many priority projects, are considering all available financing tools, and are compiling a multi-year budget. Obviously, the priorities remain the Gateway District, South Loop, Penn and American, and other commercial nodes. I believe we're all very well familiar with the goals and how we expect funding to assist us in meeting the goals. We have 445 extremely low income units at 30% AMI as being our priority focus. This shows how many units have been funded to date. It's a bit of a review of our last study session. 27 at 30% AMI, 37 at 50% AMI, 329 at 60% AMI. We have more than doubled our goal of 151 low-income units. We have a lot to go to meet our 246 goal for 50% AMI and our 445 goal for extremely low income. That gets to our total of 842 as our comp plan 2030. There are obviously also will be a certain number of NOAA units to preserve, and we have our market rate goals as well. We've funded 197 out of 1,458 market rate units. A reminder that we have over 1,000 units in the discussion stage. Our financing plan relates to our types of units. So tax increment financing and our tax increment financing pool will assist in funding some of these units. The HRA funds have led to a line of credit and utilizing housing revenue or general obligation or other bonds for our housing trust fund. The revolving loan fund is up and running and has funded the projects is available to fund projects to date. The Housing Stability Fund's support service and rental subsidy for the extremely low income units. We're still looking for grant funds, private investment, and potentially some payment in lieu funding to fund this portion of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. We have our opportunity housing tools, the payment in lieu, the land donation, land write down, the opportunity housing incentives that we're working to quantify the value that they provide to each projects. And then in addition to this private investment, we also have the developer investment and the lender financing. So this is an overall view of how we expect to fund development. There are many sources of funding, some which we utilize regularly, some that we would need to consider. Our trust fund, tax increment financing, tax abatement, state low-income housing tax credits, our Met Council and County, Hennepin County transit-oriented development, LCDA, AHIF, long-term homeless. Those funds, HUD funding, grants, donations, and then private investment is something that we'd like to focus on in the coming months and years. City funds, bonding, Minnesota housing, whether it's a general obligation bonds or housing revenue bonds, private investment tax exempt bonds, all of our CDFIs and affiliates, funds that may be available to either new construction or preservation. Our lenders, of course, our trust fund is with Old National, but there are plenty other of lenders that we work with on a project by project basis, or that have expressed interest in partnering with the city in the future. Our challenges remain the Bloomington market rate rents, the struggle we're having in the Gateway District in particular, but in other areas of the city as well, is that our market rate rents are not at 100% of area median income. They're often closer to 80% of area median income or below. So we really need those first few projects in the Gateway District to begin to establish comparable rents so that other projects may be financed at 100% area median income rent. Obviously, land acquisition and the availability of developable land. Ones that we've discussed last session: density, parking, transit-oriented development. A lot of times, funding priorities tilt towards LRT and BRT, and that limits where some of those low-income housing tax credit projects could be cited. And then location near amenities, services, employment, schools, all of those priorities. And at this point, I will hand over the presentation to my colleagues, our municipal advisors at Baker Tilly, and I believe Michaela Hewitt is next.
Just a moment.
Ms. Hewitt, are you with us?
She is. Just a moment. Try again.
Ms. Hewitt, are you there?
I am. Sorry, I was muted. Good evening.
Good evening. Welcome.
Thank you. So to lead on, or to continue from where Sherry talked, as future development proposals are brought forward to the city, typical affordability scenarios as related to the housing projects that we anticipate seeing would include those projects in which 100% of the units are market rate, those projects at which 9% of the units would be at affordable between 50 and 60% area median income. 20% of the units could be affordable at 50% AMI, or 40% of the units at 60% AMI. We could also see 100% of the units affordable at 60% AMI, which is typically achieved through income averaging for all the units between 30 and 80% AMI. In order to quantify part of the challenges of financing some of the units that are at the lower income levels, what we have in this chart is the varying rents that we would expect to see at the income levels ranging between 30% all the way up to 100% AMI. And what we have listed here is the estimated maximum monthly rent for each of these unit types. And this is based on a one-bedroom unit in which no more than 30% of the income is paid towards rent. So listed here, for example, if we looked at 30% unit, if the maximum monthly rent is about $581, and looking at what one of the recent development proposals was in the city, what the monthly market rent would be of $1,607. And just want to point out that depending on the type of project, depending on the type of market rate project, those rents could change a little bit. But for illustration, in this scenario, if we focus on the 30% AMI, the estimated gap per unit per month would be $1,026. And just to show for illustration how those numbers quickly compound, if we were to look at 100 units with the same mix or same spread between market rate and affordable, we'd see for 100 units, it'd be about 102,000. And on an annual basis, it'd be about 1.2 million. And you'll see based on each of the different AMI levels, though that gap will decrease. So digging in a little deeper on the focus of the two income levels, both the 30% and the 50% AMI. In this slide, if we focus on the remaining number of units that are part of the goal and spread for a 30% AMI unit, the remaining goal is about 408 units. And if we were to look at adding those on an annual basis over 10 years, it's about 41 units. Again, the gap is about $1,026. The monthly gap for those 41 units is $42,066, and an annual gap for the 30% AMI units is $504,792. Same methodology for the 50% units. There are 209 remaining units to be added over the next 10 years. If we looked at that over the even 10-year period, 21 units per year, the average gap is about $637 per unit, or $13,377 per month, and $160,524. So cumulatively, we'd be looking at a roughly $665,000 gap just to make those units between 30 and 50% as affordable based on the rent levels. So as we're looking at those projects in which the Affordable Housing Trust Fund dollars would be used, again, the priority developments would focus on the rent and income levels for those projects that would continue to meet the identified goals. And those would include, as we just outlined, the units that meet both the 30 and 50% AMI levels, as well as those projects that include the market rate rents at 100% AMI and greater than that, as well as preservation of the NOAA units that provide the long-term affordability. Will also be a focus on the location for these projects. As Sherry mentioned, the Gateway District, both Lindale Avenue and 98th Street, Penn and American District, South Loop, and looking at increasing density opportunities on the transit and commercial corridors. For those projects that qualify for tax increment financing, the priorities for use of those funds will be focusing on limiting the amount of TIF that's pledged to the projects when possible to 80% of the tax increment. And again, focusing on the units that have the 30% and 50% AMI units. The goal with the remaining 20% that would be held would be 10% for admin expenses to recover any of the expenses related to the tax increment district or the trust fund, as well as the additional 10% that could be available for either pooling for other affordable housing projects or used to finance more of the 30 to 50% AMI units. In addition to that would be growing the tax increment pool of funds for use in the Gateway District project area, with a priority being on the 30 to 50% AMI units. So with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Terry Heaton.
Good evening, Ms. Eaton. Are you there?
Good evening. This is Terry Heaton, and I am here.
Good evening, Ms. Eaton. Welcome. Thanks for being with us tonight.
Thank you. You have to get through the queue to get in, so this is quite an honor to get to be here this evening. I'm here to talk to you about the financing parts of this, and we'll start with looking back at what's been happening so far. This slide talks about the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. This was put together, and the model was put together when we were working to finance the AON project, but it serves as a model going forward for any TIF pool projects. And so this is how it's been financed internally. We were able to obtain funding for up to $15.2 million from a lender, Old National Bank. And from there, the blue lines show the money coming into the city. The city transferred it to the revolving loan fund, and from there the loan would be made to a developer. The loan would be repaid first from the red lines that you see, from the loan repayment back to the loan fund and to the city back to the lender. And then the model would allow that tax increment financing revenues, the TIF, could be used if there was a shortfall or as a pledge to back that. But it would actually go into a TIF revenue fund and then transfer to the city and back to the lender if needed. And then the very last security would be that if there is not enough loan repayment or TIF revenues, then the HRA levy is set aside as a reserve. It's about $500,000 a year that could also be used to make sure that there isn't a default on those bonds. In the meantime, that's if there's the backup for repayment. If there are extra revenues, the pool TIF, the gray bar in the middle, the excess revenues could be brought into a pool TIF fund, and that could be used for future projects. You could also fund that isn't tied in with lines, but there's also contribution grants and some of the other investments that Sherry was talking about. The fund isn't limited to $15.2 million. That's what we were able to borrow for, and right now we've used $7.1 million of it. There's about $8 million left that can be used for additional projects in Bloomington of this loan. And if you receive enough projects and you have more developers coming in to borrow more of that, there could be increased funding in size to the amount of need and the amount of TIF and loan payments that would be generated. So that's the current model. You're hearing a lot of big numbers tonight, or a lot of information about needs going forward. So the next slide talks about the fact that housing, there's a lot of need out there, and this model, it's limited to the local, what you can do locally. And housing isn't a Bloomington problem. It's not a local problem necessarily. It's a national, worldwide problem perhaps, but we really need to look at bigger resources to solve it. So some of the strategies that could be considered would be a sales tax revenue. That would be a special tax that through legislation that could be dedicated to affordable housing. Could be a state funding program for all communities. Of course, Bloomington isn't the only city that needs that, so maybe all cities in the state of Minnesota create some kind of a special tax that's dedicated for homeless in order to provide housing to the 30% AMI households. Another option would be a state tax credit expansion, looking at making this easier and more affordable. Some of the tax programs that are currently in place, market credits, new market credits, opportunity zones, some of these other tax credits, so that the city isn't actually funding the programs. They're getting tax credits from the federal and state government instead. Something else that we're exploring are, syndicates, champions for investment. And so these would be large commercial properties, maybe in conjunction with the Chamber of Commerce. Would look at wanting to invest in affordable housing, especially for all the businesses in Bloomington that want employees and they want affordable housing for their employees. And so there would be champions, local investors that would champion this cause and try to get in equity partners in invest in opportunity housing. There's also the avenue of nonprofit organization that could add housing, affordable housing in Bloomington or the area, and a portion of that could come back to Bloomington. So when folks are asked to donate on any of these platforms, social media platforms, or year-end charities, there's a fund that would benefit Bloomington's housing could be part of that, folks who would like a tax deduction or would just like to contribute could check off. Another option is to increase the franchise fee and just dedicate that portion to affordable housing. And although it's still a tax per se, it's a different distribution than a property tax. It's based on usage, and so would be another way to measure how the revenues are generated. And the last item on this list, grants from national, regional, state, and county and philanthropic organizations. And some examples are NOAA preservation funds, affordable housing development, 30% AMI rental assistance that the city already engages in and could do more, and employer-employee housing assistance. So, but to get grants to fund these, to seek those out and write grants for those to expand that program would be another means. This is a lot on the list, but we're just throwing these up on the page. And part of why we're doing this is we're looking at the next slide, which is what are the needs? Looking at the Housing Trust Fund, the second last line, this looks very familiar to the slide that Sherry went through, but on this page, it's the goals. And the very bottom line are the remaining goals. So we're looking at, 408 properties, low-income units, 30% AMI, and so forth, going across the page. And what we've tried to do on the next 2 pages, trying to be mindful of time here, we've tried to quantify and give some order of magnitude to the City Council of what does this mean? Is the cost to meet these goals? Are we talking, 1 million a year, 50 million a year? What are we thinking about? And quantifying the goals from the previous page, we've come up with an estimate of around 10 million per year, and that's using some assumptions. How we came up with that, we looked at the top 25 NOAA preservation units and estimated that 2,939 units at $20,000 each, which is an estimate based on the Aon property. That would be on the last bullet, about $60 million. That's to acquire and rehab NOAA properties. The annual debt service on 60 million, if you would borrow to do this today, and again, they aren't all going to get done at one time, it would be 4.2 million. And the idea would be that the interest would be, it would be provided at 0% interest. So you would get the principal back, but to carry that for, let's say, 25 years or the length of a district would cost about 1.9 million in interest per year. The next one, NOAA incentive, that's to give 0% financing and incentivize current owners. In the first example, it's like an Aon property where the nonprofit or a private developer owns it. In this case, you're incentivizing current property owners to continue to maintain and provide NOAA. And the cost to do that for 1,663 units is about $34 million today. If you bonded for all of it today, and this would be done over time, that would cost about $2.4 million in annual debt service. And again, the idea would be get repaid at least for the principal, but the interest would be $1.1 million per year that these funding sources would cover. Going on the list to the next page. The next slide, yes. Affordable housing development, new construction. And this would be at 50% of AMI, bringing rents down from 100% AMI to 50% AMI. We're estimating about 2.5 million. That's a difference of $968 per unit per month to do that. Housing stability rent, incentives to maintain increased affordability. So you're bringing rents from 60% AMI to 30% AMI. And that cost us 2.9 million. Per year, and that's assuming $583 per unit per month. And the last bullet, housing stability services, that's to address the need for place-based supportive service programs like social workers, financial assistance, and so forth, tied to 30% AMI units, and that's estimated to be 2 million. So if we total up all those annual costs, the total is about 10.4 million. And again, it's just to give you some order of magnitude, not to really be a precise number, but that is the estimated cost to achieve these goals.
Thank you, Terry and Michaela and Mike as well. So the direction that we are looking from the City Council and the HRA Commission are how best do we grow our $15 million trust fund? We will be, as I mentioned, requesting support for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund policy, as well as for our funding priority considerations. The priority development targets, the income focus and location focus, and then, a full discussion and consideration of existing and potential new funding sources. So thank you. Not a lot of time for questions, but we're happy to take them.
And again, I just, Mayor Bussey and council members, HRA commissioners, I just want to make sure that I reiterate that we will be back before you in October with another session where we will talk about some specific policy recommendations, but we're happy to take questions tonight on what we've presented. I know it's a lot, and I know we've presented a lot in the last 2 sessions, so we appreciate the volume of material that we've given you, so thank you.
And thank you. Greatly appreciated. And I also appreciate that the final slide of City Council and HRA direction, the list of bullets that you have there, that's a discussion that's going to take longer than the 6 minutes we have left in this meeting. So I hope we schedule soon a time for a full and robust discussion on some of those questions that have been brought forward. Mr. Manager?
Mr. Mayor and council members and HRA commissioners, I think it would be good, though, that since there was a lot of information, if you do have questions, let's get them out there. Even if we're not going to get into the guts of a policy discussion, so that we make sure that we do have those identified and we can provide some preliminary answers here tonight and then follow up at the subsequent conversation.
Absolutely. It wasn't my intention to cut off questions. Absolutely. I see Councilmember Beloga, Councilmember Nelson, and then Councilmember Coulter. Councilmember Beloga.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So $10 million of annual affordable housing needs. And how much of that is out of general fund? And how much of that is like out of incentives and other kinds of things? So is there a breakdown on where it's, the sources and fundings are?
Ms. Heaton or Ms. Showquist, who wants to handle that one?
Sherry, do you want to start or would you like me to address that?
Go ahead, Sherry.
So the idea is that really none of these are budgeted in any of the city funds at this time. So the funding sources, this is to tee up what it might take to grow. And I think the idea all along when Dr. Johnson was here was to start small, take care of a few items, but to really open up the program and get some large partners to come in and help with this. I think the idea from the start was to look for outside sources beyond the city budget and beyond. In the one source for the city fund would be the tax increment financing, which becomes a pledge, and that's what's been used so far. And that can continue on, but other than things that are covered with TIF, many of these are going to be requiring outside sources from that list of options to consider.
And could I add, Mayor Bussey, council members, HRA, I'd like to just add that I think one of the things we want to be able to do for you is bring you back a list of the potential needs for NOAA preservation and stability, so that we can actually give you a firmer dollar amount. But I think that also then expands to a conversation with our philanthropic partners about how we can begin to stabilize and kind of hedge against the market conversion of these properties. And I think that's a major issue for cities right now. We know that, for instance, in Minneapolis, over about a 15-year period, they lost about 15,000 units of NOAA housing in Minneapolis because there was no strategy for how the city would kind of hedge against that. And so we think Bloomington is in a similar situation just from a market interest standpoint, and that's something that this strategy envisions is a way to identify those units and then to have a strategy that we come to with partners to finance and address those needs.
Councilmember Nelson.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple quick items to put on the table. One, home ownership and how that impacts this plan, how we drive that going forward. I didn't see any discussion of that, and I'd be very interested in what our strategy and plans are to help with that. Also, when we look at NOAA properties, we have a lot of naturally occurring affordable housing that is owner occupied. And what is our strategy to maintain that so it's affordable community to continue to buy and grow equity and raise your family in? The next item that I had on there was, we looked at a lot of how are we going to fund these things. One of the things that I'd encourage us to look at is not just the funding side, but the cost side. We did a lot with the Opportunity Housing Ordinance to reduce some of the cost to develop new properties, and maybe there's further we can go. I think there's also legislative efforts we can go. This is obviously a national as well as regional issue, and taking a look at Met Council and some of the outer areas of our suburbs and some of the restrictions that they have that are leading to less capability to build housing units is, I think, a significant issue, and candidly is putting a ton of pressures on places like Bloomington that are a little bit closer in to be coming up with significant funding sources. So I guess my encouragement is to broaden the focus here a little bit to include home ownership as well as cost reduction strategies.
Thank you, Councilmember Nelson.
Councilmember Coulter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of quick things, and I don't know if this was ever mentioned and I just missed it, but do we have, and I imagine it'd be rather difficult to get this in any sort of exact way, any sort of approximate count of like numbers of people or numbers of households in Bloomington at various levels of area median income? Because I think one of the things that I am noticing is sort of missing from this conversation is I think we're talking about this in many ways sort of in a very hypothetical way. And I think it would help me, and I'm sure it would help others sort of prioritize and contextualize this conversation if we knew how many of our current neighbors right now are at various levels of income. And that's, I understand, not necessarily something you have an answer for right now. Could you go back to, in your presentation, I think it's page 18, the map with the NOAA average rent? That's the one. Thank you. What does that mean, average rent? Is that for one bedrooms, or what is that?
Councilmember Coulter, Mr. Mayor Boosie, this I took, what did I do? Every unit. So we have an average rent per unit size per unit, and then I basically sum what all the rents are. So it's basically all units at all rents, then averaged by total units. So yeah, that can drive part of that is unit size. A 2-unit or 2-bedroom unit is going to have a higher rent. So that kind of is reflected in this map.
Okay. Okay, because so I guess I'm just to understand. So on a different page here, you had for 60% of AMI, a 1-bedroom, the rent is on average $1,124. Yeah, there you go. $1,124 a month. So looking at that previous map, then I count only, and those are census tracts, I'm assuming.
Yes. Yep.
So I count only 7 census tracts in which the average rent is less than $124. Is that I'm trying to get, I think this gets to a conversation that we've had before about how dispersed these units are. And I think I think that's the point that I'm just trying to make, is that it of the 20 or so census tracts in the city, I count only 7 where the average rent is less than what it would take for someone at 60% AMI to get a 1-bedroom.
Yeah. So this is all rent. So it's a little bit apples to oranges. I can do that. I can make a map where it's looking at all just 1-bedroom units and come up with that average per 1-bedroom unit to compare to that.
Yeah, I think
that's where it gets a little bit apples to oranges, because you're looking at bedroom size.
Yeah.
What's affordable for that bedroom size, where this is just all units together. So you could potentially have a lot of 2-bedroom units that would have a higher rent. So it's not exactly the way to look at it, but we can certainly do that. We can break it down by census tract and look at that to see where that average is, to see. I think that would be an interesting way to look at it.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful.
And Councilmember Coulter, Mike, you can do income. We can look at income of families as reported through ACS, correct?
Correct. And that's exactly why I broke it out by census tract, to also see
Right.
where that income is, so we can easily compare that. Yeah.
Okay, right. So we can do a little bit further analysis, Councilmember Coulter, and bring that back in our next session with.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful. And then the last sort of question I have, I'm a little bit perplexed about how, and I know obviously there's some unit size discrepancies, but we have this opportunity zone designation in the South Loop, and wasn't part of that the purpose of the opportunity zone program to sort of address affordable housing? And yet we're seeing almost the highest average rent in the city in South Loop, and I'm just finding that to be a bit of a disconnect there. So I'm wondering if there's any discussion on why that is.
Part of that is just lag time. So the opportunity zone is based on census data, which the most recent census estimate is from 2018. I think the opportunity zone is from even 2017 data. So a lot of those units have come on just recently. So, and I think this number even reflects the Fenley, which is another 500 units. So the Fenley and BC and Indigo, that's 850 units right there, which really all of a sudden skews everything when you have 2 very large luxury apartment buildings, whereas 5 years ago it was mostly just the areas, the apartments near Village Club and around there. So it's really just a lag time issue, whereas these rents are real time. They're of the day that we pull it, so we have that rent of that day, whereas census is lagging and the opportunity zone is lagging.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. And then just sort of
Councilmember Coulter, we're over time now. I know that Councilmember Lohman has a question, and I want to make sure that our members of the HRA also have time for questions. So if we can maybe hold this for another time.
Yes. In fact, I will just shoot an email.
Very good. Thank you so much. Councilmember Lohman?
Thanks, Mayor. I'm just going to read these questions into the record so that the staff can have a look at it and get back. I remember watching a mobile homeowner close down their property, forcing several folks out of our community. It troubled me that we could not establish more permanent places for those individuals and families during that time for them to stay in Bloomington. So the question I ask myself and the rest of my colleagues is around the equity and inclusion piece. Is it fair to create temporary housing for some in our community and permanent spaces for other folks to live? Here are my questions. What is the goal of this program? What's the end objective that we want to actually achieve? 2, is there a pathway to ownership through this program? Next, how much tax support for landlords' properties are we willing to subsidize over the years of this particular program? Next, how many years of affordable housing years do we get for the millions of dollars that we intend to spend with this program? And then how many of these units are kept permanently affordable through this program? And then finally, what are other cities doing around the funding sources for programs similar to this? I'll take all of those either the next time we get together or via another modes. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Lohman.
Thank you, Councilmember Lohman. As I said, we're over time here, and we do have a city council study session to get to, but I want to make sure that our members of the HRA had an opportunity to ask questions also. We've heard from our members of the council. So Chair Thorson or any member of the HRA questions or desire to chime in on this?
Are there any questions of HRA?
I think I see Commissioner Olson trying to raise his hand there.
Thank you. Important information, and we didn't have in our packet the information put on the screen by Baker Tilly. At least I didn't have in mind. So I would really appreciate that because there's a lot of information to chew on there. And then secondly, the possibilities of other ways of getting money. We really need to spend a lot of time on that, I believe. I was surprised to see the franchise fee. I don't think that can generate a whole lot of money, and it would generate a whole lot of controversy, I'm sure. But the plan to seek local foundations or businesses, I really like the idea of what used to be called the company town. And not that we would be duplicating that from 100 years ago or so, but that it does make sense to me that the bottom line for businesses is affected by the ability of workers to get to work and to have stable housing and whatnot. And so that seems to be a win for the business and win for people. So I'm intrigued by that one. Look forward to a lot more discussion on this. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Olson. We're now 10 minutes over time. I'm going to throw out one last call to everyone. Other than beyond that, I think we do need to move on and get to the council meeting. Any last pressing items that anyone wants to bring forward? Hearing none and knowing that we do have a third session planned for October, I believe I heard earlier, which is good. If you have additional questions, as Councilmember Lohman has planned, don't hesitate to email them into staff and get questions answered ahead of time. If not, we can continue this conversation in October, and it's an important discussion, and appreciate the staff's input and all the thought that's gone into this and the information that we received from our folks at Baker Tilly. And it's just been thought-provoking and interesting, and frankly, all that we've been talking about recently, a vexing problem that we need to figure out a way to address, and not just at a city level, but as a region and as a state here in Minnesota. So,
thanks, Mayor Bussey.
Absolutely, thank you all very much. With that, City Council, I would look for a motion to adjourn this concurrent meeting between the council and the HRA, and then would ask Chair Thorson to do the same with the HRA, and if we can get a motion and get approved to adjourn, then we'll take about a 2-minute break while we reset things, say goodbye to our friends on the HRA, and then reconvene the council meeting.
Mayor, I'd be willing to do that motion, but I do see a hand from Councilmember Sean Nelson.
I believe that's an old hand. Sean, is that an old hand or a new one? The hand is down.
So moved then.
We have a motion and a second to adjourn the city council portion of this concurrent meeting. Hearing no further discussion, Ms. Christensen.
Thank you. Councilmember Beloga?
Aye.
Councilmember Carter?
Aye.
Councilmember Coulter?
Aye.
Councilmember Lohman?
Aye.
Councilmember Martin?
Aye.
Councilmember Nelson?
Aye.
Mayor Bussey?
Aye. City council portion is adjourned.
This is Chair Thorson of the HRA, looking for a motion from an HRA member to adjourn the meeting.
Commissioner Olson moves that we end the meeting.
Hukim seconds.
Motion by Olson, second by Hukim. Now looking for the roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Hukim,
Aye.
Commissioner Thorson,
Aye.
Commissioner Olson,
Aye.
Commissioner Lewis,
Aye. Aye.
All right. All right, the HRA portion of this meeting is also adjourned.
Very good. Thank you to our members of the HRA. Always good to see you. Thank you for your work. Greatly appreciated. Have a good rest of your evening. Council, we're just going to take about a 2-minute reset here. Do not log off. Do not try to log off. Just hang tight with your connection, and we're just going to get everything reset and restarted back in the control room, and we will call the council study session to order here in 2 minutes. Thanks.